Warning, we are not your attorneys. Please, don't take anything we say as legal advice. I'm Geoff.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Derrick.
And you are listening to the Not So Grand Jury,
which is still sponsored by Morwa PLLC.
So, welcome back, listeners. We're all here today to discuss Judgment at Nuremberg, a 1961 film chronicling a slightly fictionalized, Derrick will get into that, a fictionalized version of one of the Nuremberg Trials in the wake of World War II. This is essentially a military tribunal that was convened in Nuremberg, Germany, and involves 4 German judges and prosecutors that stand accused of crimes against humanity for their involvement in atrocities committed under the Nazi regime. Dan Haywood, played by Spencer Tracy, heads a panel of jurists sent by the Allies who will hear and decide the case against the defendants. Haywood seeks to understand how the German people could have been deaf and blind to the crimes of the Nazis. In doing so, he befriends Frau Berthold, the widow of a German general that was executed by the Allies in the wake of one of the earlier Nuremberg trials. And it turns out that he is living in what used to be her home that the Americans took over after the end of the war. Haywood's aide, U.S. Army Captain Harrison Byers, is played by William Shatner before he played the captain we all remember him as. A key witness for the prosecution in the trial is Irene Hoffman, played by Judy Garland.
By the way, Geoff, I did not recognize him as Shatner.
No, not at all. Not until like this moment.
Seriously.
It took me a while to play because like he first came in and I was like, I feel like I should know who he is, but didn't think much of it. And then at some point it dawned on me, but if I hadn't looked it up, I wouldn't have gotten it.
Yeah, the moment he walked on screen, I was like, oh, okay. William Shatner's in this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, looking at him now, yes, it's obvious, but wow.
Nope. Didn't get it.
Very young and handsome.
This is maybe, other than the Twilight Zone episode, this might be the only thing I've seen him in that isn't Star Trek related. I'd have to really look at his filmography, but anyway. A key witness for the prosecution in the trial is Irene Hoffman, played by Judy Garland, who is she's afraid to provide testimony about a criminal trial she was a witness in under the Nazi regime. German defense attorney Hans Rolf argues that the defendants were not the only ones to aid or ignore the Nazi regime. Rolf, by the way, is played by Maximilian Schell, who I only know from his portrayal of Hamlet in one of my favorite Mystery Science Theater 3000 episodes of all time. Rolf argues essentially 2 points. If these judges' actions made them guilty of the crimes of the Nazis, then so were everyone else involved in Germany's judicial system during the Nazi regime. And second, the trial singles out Germans for prosecution while ignoring the acts of Britain, the USSR, the Vatican, and others for enabling the Nazi regime in the first place. He also calls out the United States, highlighting in particular the decision from Justice Holmes in Buck v. Bell. Haywood must weigh considerations of geopolitical expediency against his own ideals of justice, as he and the other judges try to come to a decision in the case. Ultimately, all 4 defendants are found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. On his way out of Nuremberg after the trial, Haywood visits the prison where the defendants are being held. And one of them affirms to Haywood that his verdict was a just one, but asks him to believe that regarding the mass murder of innocents, this particular defendant never knew that it could come to that. Judge Haywood replies that it came to that the first time that he condemned a man he knew to be innocent. A final title card says that the 99 defendants sentenced to prison terms in the Nuremberg trials that took place in the American zone after World War II, none were still serving a sentence by the time the movie came out in 1961. So, not so quick summary. It's a 3-hour movie, and it was fun to...
I'm proud you got through that,
Fun to try and... I mean, most of this is from Wikipedia. And that summary I had to trim down considerably.
Well, I was going to say, the summary is either going to be 2 paragraphs and it's going to be the most blandest thing ever, or it has to jump into something because there's a lot in 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, it covers a lot of territory.
Yeah.
Speaking of, Derrick,
Yeah.
you're going to talk to us about how accurate the film is.
Yeah. I guess to start off, one thing important
To the facts, not to the law necessarily.
Right. One important thing to sort of start off here is that this is not unlike Trial of the Chicago 7. They weren't trying to get it correct, I guess is the best part. They weren't even, trying to do things that were close to real life events. The best way to describe this movie is a fictionalized drama that is based on historical events. It's certainly not based on a true story, but I say this
propaganda.
Well, yes. That's a fair way of saying it. But it is, and as I'm about to get into, there were a fair amount of things regarding the Nuremberg trials that, like, I don't think getting it correct is the right word, but it's certainly based on, right? So the movie focuses on one of the military trials that occurred after World War II, specifically called the Judges Trial. And to give a little backstory on the military trials generally, because I'll be honest, I knew that there were Nuremberg trials. I had not read up on these in God knows how long, so I had to really do some research into this. So basically, after World War II, there were military trials, also known as the Nuremberg trials, which were held mostly by the U.S., but also by France, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, against leaders of defeated Nazi Germany regarding the plotting of and committing of atrocities against their citizens during the Second World War, based on the Nuremberg Charter, officially called the Charter of the International Military Tribunal, which was signed in August 1945 by the Allied powers, the Allied powers being those I just listed, the US, UK, USSR, and France. And the goal of it was to prosecute the major Nazi war criminals. It really defined the basis for the Nuremberg trials, establishing that individuals could be accountable for these crimes, rather than just sort of the generic regime or, the country as a whole. So I want to briefly mention the key aspects of the Nuremberg Charter, because that is really what everything's based on. The Nuremberg Charter, among other things, created the tribunal itself, the International Military Tribunal. There was a initial trial, which I'm going to get into in a second, called the International Military Tribunal. That one had 4 judges, and each of the judges were from the 4 signatory powers. So the U.S. had picked a judge, France did, Soviet Union, and United Kingdom, and they each had an alternative judge. Then there were further trials, and that's where the judges' trial that we see in this movie comes from, that were U.S.-led. So at least for the main international tribunal, all 4 nations were involved. And the Nuremberg Charter also talked about the categories of crimes that were under its jurisdiction, specifically crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And it established that individuals, including leaders and officials and lawyers and judges, could be held criminally responsible for their actions, regardless of whether they were state-sponsored or, based on authority from the German administration. And then, while not allowing challenges to the tribunal itself, it did allow the defendant some sense of counsel. They had the right to counsel. They could present evidence. It ensured some version of a legal process, which really was a new concept. Like, that was not something that had been sort of done before. And as I'll get into in a second, it really sort of led to what, it was the start of international law. It was the birth of international law. Between November 1945 and October 1946, the first tribunal, so the International Military Tribunal, happened, and that was sort of the main trial. That was where 22 of the most, I say important, but like the most known surviving leaders of Nazi Germany, as well as some German organizations, were on trial. And the purpose of the trial was not just to try the defendants, but to assemble all of the evidence of the war crimes and really delegitimize the traditional sort of German elite. To talk about the main trial, so like some of the examples of the people in the main trial were like Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and like some names that honestly, even to me, are sort of just generically known names, even though Hermann Göring committed suicide before he was actually executed. But that's, hey, he was found guilty and was death by hanging, so he chose to, do it his own way. Nevertheless, the main trial lasted like a very long time. And then afterwards, there were 12 subsequent Nuremberg trials, and that was held by the U.S. And this was where they were prosecuting, so like, quote unquote, second tier Nazi officials, doctors, judges, industrialists, and other people who were involved. The third trial was known as the judges' trial. In the actual judges' trial, 16 lawyers and judges were tried, and basically they were prosecuted for implementing the Nazi, quote unquote, racial purity laws. That is what this movie is sort of intended to replicate. Obviously, in this movie, there's only 4. There were 16 in real life, but there was, in fact, a case in real life where they, tried judges and prosecutors, people who were officials of the Ministry of Justice. They were held responsible for implementing and furthering the sort of Nazi program through the eugenic and racial laws. Maybe not shocking based on my watch of the film. A lot more emotion, a lot more dramatization in the film. In real life, from everything I read, the trial was much longer. There was a lot of more, it was more bureaucratic. There was a lot of affidavits, a lot of documents, a lot of expert reports. It didn't really get into the sort of emotional aspect that this trial did in the film. Really, the film was a very simplified version of it, which is not shocking. And obviously, we've talked about this on many times on our podcast. You need to have some form of entertainment if you're going to do this. It would be very boring if there wasn't some type of emotional aspect to it.
In your looking into this, did they actually play video from the...
does appear at least some of the video was shown during the judge's trial. Huh. But I think what's interesting is that there was a hour-long video shown at the main trial, so the first trial, and it only happened a week in. So a week into trial, they showed an hour video. That was sort of that set the tone for that trial, to say the least. Yeah.
And it must have been, wow, because you're thinking, the late 40s, I guess newsreels had been around for a while, but
I think what was important was that Eisenhower charged a specific filmmaker with having teams filming when the U.S. advanced in. And that's how they got all this footage, was Eisenhower being like, I want this filmed.
If you ever go to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., it is a difficult experience.
That's a difficult experience. And then there's, the World War II Museum in New Orleans has not as much stuff, but some stuff too. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think they filmed in the actual courtroom. I saw a still image, and it's exactly, either it was a 1-to-1 recreation or they were actually in that courtroom. And it does have the big panel that slides aside so that they can point a projector at the wall.
So I actually looked into that. It was not the same courtroom, but it was meticulously reconstructed in California.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that was actually at a studio in California, and they did a damn good job. Exterior scenes, city shots were actually filmed in Nuremberg, but the courtroom was in Hollywood.
Wow. And even 15 years later, there was still all that rubble and destruction and whatnot.
Yeah. Again, I think they really picked the ruined parts. I'm not saying that necessarily the whole city was like that, but they picked the right scenery, but they did anything outside was in fact shot there. So
also, a lot of Germany was heavily bombed. It probably wasn't that hard for them to find some areas that still.
No, fair enough.
That's true. Yeah,
we're not that far removed. 61's not that far removed from the end of World War II.
Right. Yeah. Well, and they were shooting in the late 50s, so it makes sense. Shoot, there's still there's still some places there that they kept as ruins. So but yes. So. And the one thing I also want to get into before we start jumping into other aspects is how kind of important the Nuremberg trials were. Even just the fact they happened is pretty remarkable. I did a little bit of research into this, and a lot of politicians were getting pressure to just do sort of like basically hang everybody. I mean, that is what sort of the pressure was like they had done all these bad things. Why are we allowing them to have a trial? Just, you know, do summary executions of thousands of people and make a, show of force. And it was interestingly, from what I've read, the US public was the ones that wanted to have some version of a fair trial because apparently, we're a relatively young country. We feel like that we have do things correctly. And I think also one advantage we had was that even though obviously, the war was, honestly throughout the world, it never actually came to continental U.S. soil. So there was a little bit of an advantage that the main U.S. public never actually saw the war up close. It was a little bit easier for us to be like, let's give them trials as compared to, say, the UK or the USSR
or
France who are like, right, exactly. Who are like,
who killed like 25 million people. Yeah.
Correct. So it was a little bit easier for them to be like, screw it, just kill everybody. I think the U.S. was one of the ones that was a little bit more sort of laid back. I'm going to paraphrase what Dr. Jan Lemnitzer, the historian at Pembroke College of Oxford University, wrote about the legacy of the Nuremberg.
I'm laughing because the moment you said Dr. Jan, I finished it in my head with Etor.
Geoff.
And I couldn't help it.
Geoff, push the button if you have the access to push the button.
I can push the button.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
Press the button as Dino DNA.
Yeah.
All right. So
we'll cut that out.
No, we're definitely not. Dr. Jan, not Dr. Jan Etor, wrote a little bit about sort of the Nuremberg Trials at 70th anniversary. And he sort of mentioned two things. One was to celebrate the fact that it happened at all. As I just mentioned, until just before the end of the war, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin favored summary executions of thousands of leading Nazis as an appropriate form of retribution. An outcry amongst the U.S. public once these plans were leaked was a major factor in laying the road to Nuremberg. Instead of mass shootings, an old idea from the First World War was revived, based on the Versailles Treaty that had compelled Germany to hand over Kaiser Wilhelm and hundreds of senior officers to an international tribunal. In World War I, the Kaiser fled to Netherlands and the German government refused to hand over people, so it was a little different. Here, in World War II, because Germany was so heavily occupied, they couldn't resist. So the trials went ahead because we had them. They did not have to hand over anybody. I'm not saying that there weren't flaws with the Nuremberg trials, but there gave them a sort of version of a fair trial. There were obviously multiple death sentences and lengthy prison terms that were given. There were some that were acquitted in the sort of main military tribunal. We'll get into a little bit later, what happened with all the different tribunals. But the fact that there was a trial put forward a detailed record of the Nazi regime's crimes, which honestly is something that is very helpful because sometimes we do not have the best records and we have to sort of go back. There are some very irrefutable and detailed records of what happened during World War II, and which is honestly one of the sort of big things that came out of the Nuremberg trials. Also very relevant for certainly something that Geoff and I have discussed recently was how important the Nuremberg trials led to certain international law principles. So basically there was these things called the Nuremberg principles that were confirmed in a UN General Assembly resolution, United Nations General Assembly resolution in 1948, which established that individuals can be punished for crimes under international law. Prior to that, that wasn't a thing. Perpetrators just sort of hid behind their own domestic legislation or argued that they were just carrying out orders. And, prior to the Nuremberg trials, individuals did not really get prosecuted. And with the Nuremberg trials, there was a heavy influence on the Genocide Convention, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions on the Law of War, all of which were signed relatively shortly after World War II, that really led to the development of international criminal law, a lot of things, shall we say, are now inconvenient because there's countries such as the United States who seem to not want to be, they don't want a lot of international law to be applied against their own citizens, despite the fact that they were one of the main proponents of the Nuremberg trials. It is interesting how the tides have turned, the turns have tied, however you want to call it. So yeah, it's the Nuremberg trials were very important, and certainly the judge's trial was was an interesting one to focus on. It's sort of it was the fact that this was the first sort of post World War II movie that really focused on it, and they picked the judge's trial was interesting.
Is there any reason? Do we know why they chose this instead of doing the actual
I can't figure it out. I've did a little dive as to was there a real reason behind it, and I'm not sure if there's an answer.
Originally when Geoff selected this movie, I thought he was actually referring to the 2025 movie, about Hermann Goering, and I guess maybe they just didn't want to depict Goering on screen. They didn't want to give a Nazi screen time like that.
It's possible. I mean, it might be possible that they did it because the main trial was so the main trial also lasted a full year. And I think there was no scenario where you could get behind any of the characters that were defendants, right? As compared to the judge's trial where the argument is that they were doing what they were supposed to do and what they thought was right. We could sit here and talk about how that's ridiculous, but the Yawning character, there was something about the fact that he's I thought we just had to do it because it was going to be a passing thing and we were required to do it. And then all of a sudden this happened.
What about those of us who knew better? We who knew the words were lies and worse than lies. Why did we sit silent? Why did we take part? Because we loved our country. What difference does it make if a few political extremists lose their rights? What difference does it make if a few racial minorities lose their rights? It is only a passing phase. It is only a stage we are going through. It will be discarded sooner or later. Hitler himself will be discarded sooner or later. The country is in danger. We will march out of the shadows. We will go forward. Forward is the great password. And history tells how well we succeeded, Your Honor. We succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. The very elements of hate and power about Hitler that mesmerized Germany, mesmerized the world. We found ourselves with sudden powerful allies. Things that had been denied to us as a democracy were open to us now. The world said, go ahead. Take it. Take it! Take Sudetenland. Take the Rhineland. Remilitarize it. Take all of Austria. Take it! And then one day, we looked around and found that we were in an even more terrible danger. The ritual began in this courtroom, swept over the land like a raging, roaring disease. What was going to be a passing phase had become the way of life.
I don't know if I believe it. I'm also not sure if that was his argument at the actual trial, but at least there was some semblance of
That was going to be my next question: is how accurate, how close were these arguments to the ones that we saw on screen?
So it's hard to know because again, there was 16 judges in the main judge's trial. However, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. There was the mention of the Katzenberger trial during the course of the movie.
Dr. Goethe, do you recognize that headline?
Yes, sir.
Would you read it to the tribunal?
Death to the race defiler.
In what newspaper did it appear?
Julius Streicher, Der Stürmer.
What was it in connection with?
The Feldenstein case.
What was the Feldenstein case?
Your Honor, defense objects to introduction of the Feldenstein case. It is a notorious case, perhaps the most notorious of the period. It has overtones and Appeals to emotion that would perhaps be best not raised.
There are no issues or overtones that may not be raised in this courtroom. The tribunal is interested in everything that is relevant. The objection is overruled.
There was a real Katzenberger trial, and one of the judges who was tried in the actual judge's trial in real life, his name was Oswald Rothaug. He actually was the jurist who presided over the Katzenberger trial. So I think they tried to make Ernst Janning a version of that. And so I don't want to go through the sort of full real thing in the Katzenberger trial, but what I tell you is that in real life, there was a very similar version. A guy named Katzenberger, who was a businessman and had a bunch of shoe shops in Germany, was arrested in March of 1941 under the so-called Rassenschutzgesetz, I think that's how it's pronounced, which is the racial protection law, one of the Nuremberg laws, which made it a criminal offense for Aryans to have sexual relations with Jews. In that case, Katzenberger and a woman, Irene Saylor, who definitely is the character of, what's the name of the character?
Irene Hoffman.
Yes.
Yeah,
she's definitely, her character is definitely based on real life Irene Saylor, I believe. In the Katzenberger trial in real life, same thing. Katzenberger and Saylor consistently denied the charges. They claimed their relationship was more of a father-daughter. The initial investigating judge concluded there was too little evidence to proceed with the case. Now, here's where it sort of changes based on what happened in the movie. In real life, this guy, Judge Rothaug, found out about it. He is known for his fervent support for Nazism, recognized how the publicity could be good, and saw it as a way to display his Nazi credentials and further his career. He arranged for the case to be referred to him and sent tickets for the trial to all of the prominent Nazis. So he literally wanted the Nazis to be aware of what he was doing. That's a little different than, than Janning in the movie. Like in the movie, he does mention when he does his statement.
During this trial, I was content to tend my roses. I was even content to let counsel try to save my name. Until I realized that in order to save it, you would have to raise the specter again. You have seen him do it. He has done it here in this courtroom. He has suggested that the Third Reich worked for the benefit of people. He has suggested that we sterilized men for the welfare of the country. He has suggested that perhaps the old Jew did sleep with the 16-year-old girl after all. Once more, it is being done for love of country. It is not easy to tell the truth. But if there is to be any salvation for Germany, we who know our guilt must admit it, whatever the pain and humiliation. I had reached my verdict on the Feldenstein case before I ever came into the courtroom. I would have found him guilty, whatever the evidence. It was not a trial at all. It was a sacrificial ritual in which Feldenstein, the Jew, was the helpless victim.
Your Honor, I must interrupt. The defendant is not aware of what he's saying. He's not aware of the implications.
I am aware. I am aware.
And actually, in fact, it was so bad that the trial itself was just as BS as as it portrays in the movie. Like, there was one eyewitness account that Katzenberger had left Saylor's apartment when it was already dark one night, and he applied the law to sentence him to death, is essentially how that's the real life trial. It was so bad that even people who were like in support were like, this is not great. They actually, I don't know if they revoked him from being a judge, but they moved him somewhere else so that he wasn't, an active judge anymore. But he was one of the ones that was tried in the actual judge's trial. obviously you can't be in support of that. They sort of turned him into a much nicer version with Yanning, because like he does, as I recall, when he does his quote unquote statement, whatever that is at a trial, he basically says like, I knew how I was going to rule before I ruled, but the way he acted was like, I felt like I had to do it given what was going on. He didn't seem happy about it, but he said like, I knew what I was doing. As compared to this guy, the real life guy who was actively evil and wanted to show how much he was like, how bad he was.
I wonder if that has something to, or if that played a role in why they went with the judge's trial in this and the, I guess, stage play before, or the earlier version of this. Because if it was the trial of the military leaders, or the whether Goering or the businessman or what have you, if it just would have been too cartoonishly evil and kind of unbelievable. Whereas these were more street level, and I'm putting those in pretty heavy air quotes, but these were sort of rank and file people in the legal system.
And they were sort of people who were doing their job, and but their job became really interesting because certain laws, and as we all know, judges are supposed to uphold the law, right? What do you do as a judge when a law comes down from, Adolf Hitler himself, and it is known that it's not great to go against him? What the hell do you do? And I mean, I as I understand it, some judges resigned and just got the heck out of Dodge, just left and said, no way I'm be a part of this. Others, at least the one that's portrayed in the movie, was more like, this is going to go away. It's just a thing. Like, it's going to last a few months, then we'll get back to normalcy. And then before you know it, here we are. Again, hard to know if that's actually something that anyone can believe, but I do believe at least some of the judges in the judge's trial had the sort of belief that these judges did, which was like, all we were doing was our job. Whether you believe that means that they could have been found guilty for the crimes against peace and crimes against humanity, I think that's a different question.
Yeah, and this is where it's not an excuse to say you were just following orders.
Correct. Well, and that was really the big part of, that was the sort of purpose of the Nuremberg Principles, which was not something that had happened previously. So
we do get to introduce the trope of changing something from real life to make it more believable in the movie, which is a rare but good trope.
I mean, funny enough, that's actually similar to the trial of the Chicago 7, where we thought it was insane, and then we look it up and we're like, oh my God, the actual trial was more bonkers.
Apollo 13 is another example, because in Apollo 13, the movie, they're relatively calm, but they are kind of freaking out. In the actual real life, they are stone cold sober. No one is freaked out in any way. Like, oh, okay, we might die. All right, let's get to work on this.
And so one last thing I'll talk about is, and we could move this to later depending upon how the conversation with Geoff goes and Mike goes, but one thing and this brings up the whole last title card where it said that no one who had been sentenced was still serving their sentence. I believe that was true, and it was mostly because a lot of the people that were sentenced to relatively lengthy prison terms had their sentences commuted due to intense political pressure in the early 1950s. After World War II, there was an establishment of the sort of allied, I think the U.S. High Commissioner was for the United States, but there was the Allied Commissioners, which were post-established to manage the U.S. interests in occupied Germany. I will give France credit. France was one of the ones that actually had just one commissioner for the 6 years while they were transitioning. Not shockingly, the U.S. had 4 different ones, including an acting one, because we can't keep our people in any position for more than a couple of years. But the first one in that position, there was intense pressure to sort of let these guys go. You've made your point. You've done all this stuff. And he basically commuted almost all of the sentences of anyone who was still in jail in 51. And then some of them were released, over the next few years. I do know there are some judges, the actual judges of the tribunals, who were like, Imagine my shock that I had made a ruling and then all of a sudden I read in the paper that this other guy had just commuted the sentences. Like, that's great.
And ironic,
so anyway,
given what I'm about to talk about.
Well, also true. Now, I will say the one thing that the title card does not do necessarily the best job of saying is that there was a lot of people who were killed through by executions and death by hanging and various other things. A lot of the defendants committed suicide. Some just died in jail. A lot of people got off scot-free, to say the least.
Some of them came over to help us start a space program.
Yes.
Did we try any scientists? I think it was just the military people and the judges and prosecutors, wasn't it?
So 450 to 500 people were tried in the various tribunals, but 2,000 were brought up for possible indictment. A lot of the business people, scientists, things like that were part of the 2,000, and they just we never got there. I think there may have been a couple scientists that were indicted but never found guilty. Maybe the head scientist, as it were, of certain aspects of the military. But to my knowledge, none of them were ever found guilty. Anyway, also the defense attorney claiming that at the very end of the movie that he predicted that many of the guys he had just sentenced would be released in 5 years. There's no goddamn way he would have known that at the time. It was the third case of 12 cases. It was not known how the political pressures were going to go. They ended up having 9 more trials after this. There's no scenario where he would have said that to the judge. No way.
And the prevailing attitude could have very easily gone the other way, where, we know we sentenced them to life in prison, but let's make that as short as possible. By executing him.
Yeah, 100%. So that's another thing. But anyway, I think that hits a good chunk of the sort of real comparisons, as it were. Now Geoff gets to talk about some super fun stuff.
Super fun. Yeah. So I wanted to focus on sort of what the charges against the judges and the prosecutor were focused on. And the movie talks a little bit about sort of the breakdown of the independent judiciary under the Nazis. And I wanted to dive more into that because of current events. So I went and found the decision that was announced for this case, where they announced their sentences and whatnot. And by the way, this is sourced from a University of Missouri, Kansas City archive. The case, in case anyone's interested, is United States of America v. Alstetter et al. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Alstoetter et al. Went through a bunch of excerpts from the decision. I wanted to kind of talk about how the judiciary broke down in the way that it did. And it's important to note some of the differences between how the German system was set up even before, well, I don't want to say even before the Nazis, because I don't have a clear picture of what it was under the Weimar regime. But under the Nazis, German law essentially made Hitler the chief judge of the country. He had the authority to, according to the decision, he had, quote, the authority to enact, enforce, and adjudicate law, and, end quote, and his decisions were, quote, incontestable. That's the environment that the judges that you talked about, Derrick, resigning or trying to, stay on and, I don't know, be the adult in the room, or maybe if, the attitude if I step down, someone else worse is going to, take my place or what have you. What essentially this did was, when you name somebody like Hitler the supreme law, there are no restrictions on that person. Let me read a bit from the decision here. This is testimony that was given by a Dr. Jahreis, Jahreis, who was a prominent law professor and a witness in support of the defendants in the case. And I want to circle back to that because I think it goes to something that you asked, Mike. This is his quote. If now in the European meaning one asks about legal restrictions, and first of all one asks about restrictions of the German law, one will have to say that restrictions under German law did not exist for Hitler. He was a lugubrious, that's not the right word.
The fun word.
And it's Latin, so I'm going to get it wrong anyway. He was legibus solutus, in the same meaning in which Louis XIV claimed that for himself in France. Anybody who said something different expresses a wish that does not describe the actual legal facts. And I think the fact that they bring this up in the decision and that this was a witness for the defendants suggests to me that at least some of the arguments made in the actual trial were the same as that in the movie. That, like, this was, if you were a judge, this was what you had to do. You didn't have any other choice.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't think you can make the argument that shit didn't happen. Like, it happened, and you made some decisions where you clearly made innocent people, like, you found innocent people guilty.
I mean, put yourself in the position of the defense attorney. To some extent, you are arguing that some of this didn't happen, or that they can't prove it. That, like, no, the reason this man was the one person who they sterilized. Well, he wasn't sterilized for speaking out. He was sterilized because he was incompetent, and that was the law. So that's why we had, like, it was. I'm not defending eugenics in any way. It is abhorrent and evil, but if it makes the law, I don't know. I guess you're trying to say that he was done for a more justifiable reason, a reason that still happened in the United States or whatever.
Right.
And by the way, I'm sure both arguments were made, right? I'm sure it was it didn't happen, but even if it did, here's the situation.
I kept trying to not put myself in the position of the defense attorney, but, like, what argument would you make if you were the defense attorney? It's like, there's not a good one here, but you got to, like, you were supposed to zealously advocate for your clients.
Yeah. Well, that raises an interesting question. There are, like, in legal process, there are some legitimate arguments that you could make. One, none of the principles laid out in the Nuremberg Charter were crimes at the time that they were acting. And at least in the US, we have a principle where you can't have ex post facto criminal statutes. You cannot charge somebody with a crime that wasn't a crime when they did the act. That's a perfectly legitimate argument. The way these tribunals were structured essentially said that we're ignoring that. So there are principled arguments that you could make. I don't think that, I mean, obviously that doesn't excuse any of their actions. They're more affirmative defenses than anything else. You know, this happened, but you can't hold them responsible because XYZ. So, yeah, there were essentially no checks on what Hitler was doing, and whatever he decided was essentially the law. And another aspect of this is that even under the Weimar Republic, it was the crown jurist of the Weimar Republic that held that if German laws were enacted by regular procedure, again, I'm quoting from the decision, if German laws were enacted by regular procedure, judicial authorities were without power to challenge them on constitutional or ethical grounds. So what that means is, like, that would be like if here, as long as Congress passed a law by their normal process and the president signs it, it doesn't matter that the Constitution says they can't do that. They did, so we're going to enforce it. That was something that it seems existed even prior to the Nazi regime. And we can talk, if we want, about some, disturbing parallels with what we're seeing right now. We can look to Trump v. Hawaii, where they said, look, the president's authority on matters of foreign affairs is essentially absolute. Whatever actions they make, the courts aren't able to second guess those because it's stepping out of their realm, so to speak. The other case that I wanted to talk about in relation to these two principles is the decision from 2024 saying essentially that when the president acts within his exclusive authority, those actions, he has absolute immunity for those actions. And when it's authority that is, delegated by Congress, he has presumptive immunity. No idea what that means because they didn't define it for those actions. So essentially, whatever the president does, even if it's trying to fraudulently influence an election after the fact, can't be held criminally responsible. We see aspects of this happening today, and it's very disturbing. Couple other points that I wanted to make that really highlighted this from the decision. One of the things that Hitler, did as supreme judge was interfere directly in the criminal process. He would, if he didn't like a sentence that a judge had handed down, he would essentially dictate to them through a proxy that the sentence needed to be changed, generally escalating to they need to be executed. And this happened essentially all the time. I have several paragraphs from the decision here. I won't bother reading all of them. But essentially, I don't know why any of the judges, once that's happening, it doesn't matter what you're, you can be as much an adult in the room as possible. And the decisions are not in your hands. There's no, you're just an empty robe, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, if you're asking, when do you step down because you're no longer being a check? I don't know.
I mean, if that's not the moment, you don't have a line. Let's put it that way.
That's a fair point. The only counter I could think of is I doubt he was dictating every case, so there's still probably a decent chunk of your work that you could do. But yeah, I understand.
I mean, I think the point is if so, the example you have, Geoff, which is someone who was sentenced to 10 years, and then apparently he was told that Hitler was told that happened, and he said nope, and within 10 days. He was basically the judge was informed that they needed to quash that and then sentence him to death and execute him immediately.
Yeah, it's awful.
To you as a judge, I don't know what your exact next step is, but it can't be to continue, can it? If that is your job as a judge and you have now been told to do that, how can you be yeah, this is cool? And again, never been in that situation, obviously. But I have a feeling I'm resigning that next day. But I'm also getting the hell out of the country first.
Well, we saw it in Trump's first term, a bunch of people saying that they were going to be a check. And now we're seeing in the second term, they're not there. And honestly, things are slightly worse. But I also don't fault them for not being there. I shouldn't say slightly worse.
I mean,
things are much worse.
Yeah.
Much worse.
And plenty of the career people are still there.
Yeah.
I mean, the career bureaucracy is...
But even that,
they're still from the Obama administration.
True, but also when everything was going down in Minnesota, not that it stopped, but a huge chunk of the prosecutors resigned when they were told to start prosecuting Renee Good's wife.
Right. Yeah, and we're seeing things happening quickly. It may have been more a death of a thousand cuts, where you don't really. When it is advancing by inches over a decade and not in these big fits and starts like we're seeing, I don't know.
This movie makes me want to read more about World War II, which is a thing I've always should have been doing, but yeah.
This movie makes me want to take anxiety medication, but...
It was a tough watch. I mean, it was a good watch, but it's a tough watch.
Yeah, we'll get into that for the most part. The last thing I want to highlight in terms of the breakdown of the independent judiciary in Germany was the specific attacks against lawyers as well as the judges. At one point, a series of what were supposed to be confidential letters to essentially the legal community. I'll read what the decision says. An examination of these letters convinced the tribunal that the actual, though undeclared purpose was to suggest to defense counsel in all of these criminal cases that we've been talking about. Sorry, not the criminal cases of the Nuremberg Trials, the criminal cases that Hitler was meddling in. The actual, though undeclared purpose was to suggest to defense counsel that they avoid any criticism of National Socialist justice and refrain from too much ardor in the defense of persons charged with political crimes. And yet again, we have a number of parallels with letters from DOJ officials, not even bother to make them confidential. There were even executive orders targeting law firms that prosecuted people in the prior Trump administration or employed lawyers who were at DOJ when Trump was being prosecuted for his crime. We're seeing a lot of this play out right now, and it's really disturbing. I think there are essentially two things that have really helped hold back the trend that we're seeing right now, and those are that first, the just unbelievable incompetence of so many of the people in the current Trump administration. I'm sure there was incompetence in the Nazi regime that, everyone's people, but
famously there was, and like people have talked about how a lot of people viewed Hitler as a joke at first.
Sure. But I think in much the same way that, I might regard George W. Bush as a joke.
Yep.
He surrounded himself with, one has to admit, very competent people for the most part. I mean, we could talk about Harriet, what's her name? But this administration is full of just, mustache twirling morons. And
The line from Benjamin Wittes is malevolence tempered by incompetence.
Sure. Yes. And then also that in the Weimar Republic, there was not the culture of independence in the judiciary, whereas here we have had that for hundreds of years. Now, we've got a system of immigration judges that have essentially never been independent because they are not given their offices by the Constitution, but that's a conversation for another time. One of the things that I think the attitude expressed by a lot of these judges where, stay in, keep your head down, try and do what you can in the system, makes fixing the system when you're coming out of it so much more difficult, because anybody who is in the regime can say, oh, I was trying to be a check. I was trying to, stem the tide. I wasn't really, gung-ho for the ideology.
Hi everyone, Derrick here with a brief message. The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by my law firm, Morwa PLLC. One of Morwa PLLC's many practice areas is business law. If you are a business owner or someone who is thinking of starting up a new or side business, you need a legal team who can efficiently provide you legal counsel, keeping you and your business away from potential legal issues, and if necessary, representing you in any disputes that do arise. We pride ourselves on being cost efficient while also getting to know our clients. If you want less stress and more support, you need more law. If you would like to set up a free consult, please click on the link in the show notes, visit our website, www.mooreatty.com, that's mooreatty.com, or email us at contact@mooreatty.com. And now, back to the show.
All right, you guys want to get to reviewing?
So let me first talk about my couple notes that because interestingly, we've talked about a lot of things, but not things that actually happened in the movie. So let's talk about some of the things in the movie. One, this is a thing that happened in the movie, but it's a comparison to the actual judge's trial. At the end of the movie, there's the dissenting opinion that one of the judges talks about.
Yeah.
In real life, there was a dissenting opinion, but it's not in the same vein.
Oh, he wanted the death penalty, didn't he?
No, and so in the real life judge's trial, there were 4 counts that were part of the indictment. The first one was like participating in a conspiracy to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity, and then there were 3 others. Count 1 was dropped. 2/3 of the court declared the charge to be outside its jurisdiction. The third judge filed a dissenting opinion, wanting all the judges to be tried for crimes against humanity, even more than what they were actually tried for. So the sole dissenting opinion in real life actually wanted them to have more potential liability.
Interesting.
So not in the direction where it went in, which, the movie, obviously, one of the judges basically says, and like, I'm trying to remember what he actually said, and you might want to drop the clip in of his little, his very brief monologue, Geoff, where he basically just says, I think he kind of said what we were talking about, right? That like, they just want to, like, they had to do it. They had no other option. And maybe he didn't say that, but drop the clip in.
I'll drop the clip in, regardless
make
of
more sense.
Yeah. I wish to point out strongly my dissenting vote from the decision of this tribunal, as stated by Justice Haywood, and in which Justice Norris concurred. The issue of the actions of the defendants who believe they are acting in the best interests of their country is an issue that cannot be decided in a courtroom alone. It can only be decided objectively, in years to come, in the true perspective of history.
Couple things about the actual movie. One, did anyone else find it weird that the opposing counsel objections, they like walk up next to the guy questioning.
Yeah.
Did anyone else find that weird? Or was it just me?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not normally how objections work in our system, but also, I don't know, 1961 cameras might have just not wanted to do a whole nother setup.
That was going to be my question, was because they had, as we learned, they literally created their own set, did they only have like a limited places where they could put the cameras, and they're like, we're not that good to like go back and forth between where they are. And also their counsel table was weirdly right behind where the, where they were asking questions. It was just a little interesting.
It was an oddly laid out courtroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, accurate to at least the still image that I saw of the actual courtroom. So
it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of this was to fit into the frame or fit into, so they don't need an extra boom mic. Like I'm sure that had a huge effect on 1960s filming.
Yeah, I mean that's possible, but I just found that it irked me when it first happened. I'm like, why is he standing up and side saddling the other lawyer while he's objecting? Like it was just a little weird.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was funny. The other thing that I did. Oh, sorry, go for it, Mike.
I was going to say, objection, Your Honor. He's kind of right next to me.
Your Honor, he's
right here.
He's real close.
Really, I can smell what he had for lunch.
Actually, when the defendant Yawning stands up and like in the middle of his counsel's like when he like is basically going at the woman on the stand and making her cry, and the defendant Yawning stands up and stops him. When he wants to make the statement, the defense counsel's like, "Give me time with my lawyer." And then the prosecutor stands up, and they are right next to each other, screaming at the judge, but like right next to each other. It's just, it's really weird. And like, I just found that whole thing to be jarring because I'm like, they're just screaming each other's ear towards the judge, which felt weird. So I thought that was weird. The other thing that, and I wanted to look it up to see if the headphones thing that they were using was a thing that happened at the actual trial, and it was.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peterson. That's all.
Rolf?
Mr. Peterson, you may take your earphones off now, if you want to.
That was like, and I will link to this in the show notes because there's a cool little overview from the National World War II Museum, which is in New Orleans, and there's an article that was written only a few years ago about translating and interpreting that happened at the Nuremberg Trials. But basically, there were live translations, and every seat in the courtroom had those little headphones that IBM provided for free. And they had interpreters from...
As reparations for their participation in the... maybe a little bit?
I don't think that's what the purpose was, Jeffrey. I think they were doing that so they could make money later, which in fact they did, because of course then IBM became the sort of official interpreter, blah, 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 whatever. But what was interesting was on each of the, like, apparently there's little dials that are attached to the headphones, and basically you put it on the different channels. So like channel 1 was whatever was happening, channel 2 is English, 3 Russia, 4 France, 5 German, and there were interpreters in the room who were live, interpreting in real time, which made sense because sometimes, now I'm a little confused because sometimes they would, like in the movie, sometimes they would like be like a witness would be like have their headphones off, and then the prosecutor would come up and be like, headphones back. Like they would tell them to put their headphones back on, and I'm like, it's a little weird to say you have to do that. I think the implication was that the defense counsel in real life was speaking in a different language, possibly German, and the prosecutor was speaking in English, blah, blah, blah. One other interesting thing that I don't think happens in the movie is that there are still photos occasionally that you'll see from the actual trial, where some of the either it's the people that were on trial or the witnesses had taken their headphones off. That was their way of saying this doesn't matter to me. That was their way of, that was their sort of way to just say this trial is BS. I'm not listening. So they would take their headphones off and stop listening. That was like their sort of very tacit way of objecting to the tribunal without actually objecting to the tribunal.
Interesting.
Right. I'm not really listening to you. Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, I guess it's saying like this is them saying it's a show trial. So what am I doing?
Correct. Essentially. Yeah. So anyway, anything else you guys had generally about the movie?
I don't know if I'll have another opportunity for this. So can I tell one of my favorite post World War II stories?
Sure.
Love it.
All right. So Hermann Goering was, in addition to being a monster and a Nazi, also a famous art collector. And he and Hitler apparently had a little competition about who could collect the most, beautiful, amazing classical European art. And there was an artist that Hitler had two of. He had two Vermeers, and Goering had none. And he was desperately trying to get a Vermeer as he's conquering Europe. And there was a huge movement to prevent the Nazis from getting these classic artworks. And B, no one wanted to fucking work with him to sell them. So people were like shipping them out of the country or whatever. Eventually he finds a guy who's willing to sell him, an art dealer who's willing to sell him some Vermeers. He sells them in peace. And fast forward, the war ends, Goering's put on trial, all these things are happening. And eventually, I think it's the Belgians go after him for the art dealer for cooperating with the Nazis. And he says, no, I would never sell him a classic piece of art. It was a forgery. I made a forgery and sold it to him. How would you prove that? He's like, all right, get me some art supplies and some vodka and some absinthe. And I'll make you a forgery. And he does it, and what do you know, the guy can make a really good fake Vermeer, and eventually they prove it through some other means. The line that I loved is from Goering's biographer. When he discovered that this happened, it was like a child discovering evil exists for the first time. Like, he's just absolutely devastated he was taken advantage of, and it makes me very happy.
This became a movie, right?
I don't know.
There was definitely a movie about getting the Nazi art after the war.
Yeah. Monuments Men.
The last Vermeer in 2019 is apparently based on it.
Oh, there's two. Interesting.
Yeah. I love the idea of Hermann Goering being devastated by him having paid for a forgery.
I mean, Geoff, correct me if I'm wrong. The Monuments Men, that had a ridiculous cast, right? Was that the one with Clooney, Damon, Murray, Kate Blanchett?
I've never seen it.
John Goodman.
Goodman, yeah.
No.
Kate Blanchett.
Just those names. Just those names make me want to watch the movie.
Maybe we should watch it. I don't know if it's illegal at all.
Oh, we'll find. I'm sure we'll find something to talk about.
We can do it with Jaws. We can do it with that. I want to note just a little bit in terms of the timeline. We've talked about, that this was sort of the a seminal moment in international law, and just wanted to point out in terms of when this happened that the UN had been formed at the time that the trials took place, but had not yet had their first meeting. So one of the places that you'd think maybe something like this could have happened would be in the International Court of Justice, except it wouldn't have been against individual defendants. That did not yet exist in practical sense, even if it existed on paper. And I just wanted to note that in light of Derrick, you and I doing our International Court of Justice Jessup stuff.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Makes sense.
Okay.
Cool.
Are you guys ready for reviews?
Let's do it.
Yeah, I guess it was my pick. I'll go first. In terms of entertainment value, this was rough to watch. Not just because of the this is hitting a little closer to home than I expected. But it is 3 hours long, and at least the first hour is a slog. There was a lot of time spent. I mean, we see Spencer Tracy go and get a hot dog, and then like a German girl talks to a German girl, a young German woman says something to him, essentially like "Have a good day, granddad," but in German, and he doesn't know what she said. And I like it read to me as if he thought this young German woman was flirting with him, a 63-year-old man, that played very strangely. And also was kind of not forwarding the story at all. I was getting really bored during the start of this. Once the trial kind of hits its stride, it was more watchable, maybe not more entertaining. I could have done without the footage from like the liberation of the concentration camps of hundreds of naked dead bodies being bulldozed into mass graves. I really didn't need to see that last week. The performances themselves are good. I'm trying to not give it a no on entertainment value because I do like the performances. This is the only thing I've seen Burt Lancaster in other than Field of Dreams, and I liked his performance as Yawning. It was interesting to see William Shatner. I thought Judy Garland was really good, and in I guess one of her last roles, because she died like 3 years later. But I think I'm going to say no. I was disappointed by this movie from an entertainment perspective. From a legal perspective, I think it did the best job you could of demonstrating what these trials were like in even a 3-hour movie. So on the law, I'm going to say yes. On entertainment value, I have to say no. Like, I am dreading going back and pulling clips from this. I really don't want to.
That's fair. I liked this. I didn't. Now I should disclose there were moments where I was watching this on like 1.5 speed.
That probably helps. And
yeah, I also didn't find it that difficult to get through, but I did have to take a break at some point. So I liked all the performances. I liked. I don't watch movies from the 60s that much occasionally, other than Geoff selecting them. So it's nice to kind of take a break, and there's just different choices that are made then than would be made now or would have been made in the last 20 years, really. This movie kind of reminded me of my grandparents in a way that made me feel warm inside. So I don't know, like something about
weird.
Well, it's just like how they carried themselves.
Okay.
Like not like my grandparents were like men of those, or my grandfathers were both like men of that generation, were like World War II vets. So like,
I'm sure they would have
something
loved
about that
to be compared to Spencer Tracy.
Sure, or Shatner.
Shatner,
yeah. So I'm gonna say a thumbs up on that. I didn't find it that difficult to get through, and I think it got as much of the law right as it could. There's nothing there that I found, other than where they were sitting in the courtroom. I don't think there was anything that like. And now I'm the most ignorant member of this panel on international law, so maybe there's something I'm missing, but I didn't see anything there that I thought they got really wrong. So I would say thumbs up on both.
So I do think it gets again, it's supposed to be fictionalized, so it gets a lot of the law right, and certainly right enough compared to the stuff we've said yes on before, that I think that's got to be a yes. I'm like Geoff. I'm trying to figure out whether it's a yes or no on entertainment, because it's very well done. It's very well acted. I had to watch it in 3 parts. The first part is a slog. I also watched it on 1.5 speed too. So,
didn't even occur
honestly,
to me.
so here's what's funny.
It's on YouTube.
Well, here's what's actually funny about the 1.5 speed thing. I actually thought it works pretty well, except when the main defense counsel talks and he starts talking so fast. I'm like, why is he talking so fast? I'm like, right, I'm on 1.5 speed. I didn't even realize I was on.
I listen to most of my podcasts at like double speed, and it works for most things pretty well, except when like, especially if someone has an accent, it's like, this is a little too much.
Right. Well, and what's funny is if you put him back to 1.0 speed, he talks perfectly fine. He's just a decently fast speaker And then with the accent, it adds, a little something to it. I'm going to say yes on entertainment, and I'm simply going to say yes on entertainment because I think listen, I think them doing it in 61 is kind of phenomenal. I think the acting's great. It certainly makes me want to do more research on WW2, which is something I rarely say. I'm not hey, I should do research on something I just saw. That's not something I normally say. That's normally my wife's job, is to, when we go travel places, she's the one that wants to take notes and do research, and I'm the one that wants to find the next bar immediately and have another drink in my hand. This makes me want to do so much more research on the Nuremberg trials and other things. So I think because of that, it's enough entertainment. Now, by the way, I have no plans to rewatch this, for the record. Like, no plans to, queue up Judgment at Nuremberg for a yearly watch. I don't think that's going to happen. But for purpose of what it is, very entertaining, and it's certainly a thinking one. So I'm going to say yes.
All right.
The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwa PLLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com or message us on any of our social media accounts.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2026, all rights reserved.